If only I had walked out the moment my father smiled and said it. If only I had stood up, taken my coat, and left before the room laughed. But I did not. Because if I had walked out, he would have won. Instead, I stayed seated, hands folded, expression calm, while my father leaned back in his chair, lifted his glass, and said loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Well, at least everyone here knows Lydia tried." That word, tried, hung in the air like smoke. Polite laughter followed. The kind people use when they are relieved it is not them being humiliated. I felt heat rise in my chest. Not embarrassment. Something colder. My name is Lydia. I am 32 years old, and that Friday evening, sitting at a table in the most expensive restaurant in the city, I became invisible in a room full of witnesses. What my father did not know, what no one at that table knew, was that this dinner was not just a family gathering. It was a deadline. And he had just insulted the only person who could end everything he was about to lose. The restaurant was expensive in a quiet way. White tablecloths, low lighting, servers who never interrupted conversations, only hovered when needed. My father loved places like this. Places where money did not shout. It whispered. He sat at the head of the table like he always did. Straight back. Confident. A man who had never once doubted his authority. Around him were relatives, business associates, and two people he had introduced as friends of the family. They were not family. They were witnesses. When my father called me a failure, he was not angry. He was relaxed. That was what hurt the most. He was not lashing out. He was performing. And everyone else was watching. I looked down at my plate. I did not respond. I did not defend myself. I just sat there, silent, while conversations resumed around me. Then something strange happened. When the server came to refill our glasses, he hesitated, just for a second, and instead of looking at my father for approval like every other server had done all night, he glanced at me. Eyes met. He gave a small nod. Then he moved on. No one else noticed, but I did. Growing up, my father was admired. Not loved. Admired. People trusted him because he looked like stability. Successful. Always in control. He gave advice freely. Introduced people to the right contacts. Helped neighbors refinance homes. Sponsored community events. Donated to charities. If something succeeded, he was credited. People said things like, "He has such vision," or "He always knows the right move." If something failed, someone else carried the blame. Usually me. From the outside, I was lucky. Daughter of a respected man. Given opportunities. Invited to important meetings. Introduced to influential people. Inside the family, the story was simpler. I was always almost good enough. Almost smart enough. Almost capable. Almost worthy of the opportunities one had been given. Almost. That word followed me everywhere. My father never said I was useless. He just made sure everyone knew I had not quite figured things out yet. And people believed him. Why would they not? He was the one who looked successful. The first time my father offered me a role in one of his business ventures, I thought it was trust. I was 24. Fresh out of college. Eager to prove myself. He called it a learning experience. A chance to see how real business worked. Small responsibility. Low visibility. No risk. I handled logistics. Paperwork. Timelines. I organized files. I tracked invoices. I made sure meetings happened on time. It was boring work, but I did it well. And while I did it, I noticed things my father did not talk about. Contracts that looped back on themselves. Clauses that repeated under different names. Payments that went to entities I could not identify. I asked once if that was normal. My father smiled and said, "You think too much, Lydia. Just focus on your tasks." So I did. But I also kept copies of everything I saw. Not because I suspected anything. Just because I was careful. And because something about those contracts felt wrong. Every project I touched improved. It was subtle at first. Then undeniable. Metrics rose. Deadlines stabilized. Costs dropped. I streamlined processes. I caught errors before they became problems. I found inefficiencies no one else had noticed. But when praise came, it skipped me. My father would clap someone else on the back, mention a partner's vision, thank an advisor who had not been involved at all. When I spoke up, I was told not to be sensitive. When I warned about risks I had identified, I was told to relax and trust the process. When those risks materialized exactly as I predicted, I was quietly blamed. Lydia should have flagged that earlier, my father would say, even though I had. In writing. With documentation. But no one remembered. Or no one cared. The pattern repeated. The work. Others took credit. And when things went wrong, my name appeared in the reports. At holidays, relatives asked me what I was up to these days. My father answered for me before I could speak. She is still figuring things out, he would say with a patient smile. Or, she is exploring different paths. Or, she is learning patience. Each word shaved something off me. Pride. Confidence. And I let it happen. 'Cause I was learning something too. I was learning how my father operated. How he shifted responsibility without ever appearing to do so. How he built narratives that made other people believe they had failed, not him. How he used language to erase contributions and rewrite history. I stopped trying to correct him. I stopped defending myself at family dinners. I just watched. And I documented everything. I started noticing a pattern in the business structures. Every time a project neared profitability, my name disappeared from the paperwork. Documents were updated. Emails stopped including me. Access to files was quietly revoked. Always politely. Always framed as efficiency. We are streamlining the team, my father would say. Or, you have done your part. Time to move on to the next thing. But I kept copies of the original documents. The ones that showed my name. My role. My contributions. Not because I planned revenge. Not because I was angry. Just because I needed to understand what was happening. And slowly, I began to see the structure he had built. A structure where I was always present. But never credited. While organizing old records one evening, I noticed something. A recurring symbol on certain contracts. A small marking in the corner of pages. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. It appeared on properties, holding entities, subsidiaries, always connected to ventures my father controlled. And always, when I traced the ownership back far enough, connected to me. My name appeared in legal documents I had never signed. Or documents I had signed years ago without understanding what they meant. Just a formality, my father had said back then. Standard business protection. I had trusted him. But now, looking at the pattern, I understood. I was not just a worker he had underpaid and undervalued. I was a legal buffer. A layer of protection between him and risk. A name on paper that shielded him from liability. An older acquaintance of my father, a man named Vincent who had once been a partner, noticed me studying files one evening at a business event. He walked over, glass in hand, and asked quietly, "Do you know why he never lets you leave?" I looked up at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" Vincent glanced across the room where my father was laughing with a group of investors. "Because you are useful where you are," Vincent said. Not powerful enough to challenge him, but positioned perfectly to absorb consequences. He took a sip of his drink. "If you ever figure out how deep it goes, be careful. Men like your father do not let go easily." Then he walked away. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. I went back through every document I had saved, every contract, every entity, and I started mapping the connections. What I found was bigger than I had imagined. Vincent was right. My father had used layered ownership structures to shield himself from risk. Properties were owned by holding companies. Holding companies were owned by trusts. Trusts were managed by entities I was listed as a director of, even though I had no real control. If anything went wrong, if debts came due, if lawsuits were filed, the liability would trace back to those entities. My name. Not his. He had built a fortress. And I was standing in the moat, holding the consequences. But there was something he had not anticipated. Those same structures that made me a buffer also gave me a kind of access. A presence in the legal framework. Foothold. If I understood it correctly, if I moved carefully, I could do more than just protect myself. I could shift the entire structure. That dinner, the one where my father called me a failure, was not random. I had known about it for weeks. A major transaction was pending. A deal that would finalize several properties and consolidate my father's control over a portfolio he had been building for years. My presence at the dinner was not symbolic. It was required, because my name was on one of the entities involved. A formality, he had said. I just needed to show up. Sign a document if needed. Let the adults handle the business. But I had done something before that dinner. Something small. I had filed a request to update ownership records on one of the holding companies. Technicality. Correction of outdated information. It looked like routine paperwork. But it changed the authorization structure. It changed who had the power to approve transactions. And my father did not know yet. I stopped reacting to the insults after that dinner. No confrontations. No arguments. No attempts to defend myself. Became agreeable. Quiet. Almost invisible. My father grew comfortable. He stopped watching his words around me. He stopped being careful about what documents he left where. He grew careless. And I documented everything. Every conversation. Every contract. Every entity. Every connection. I built a file that traced the entire structure back to its foundation. And I waited for the right moment. 2 weeks after the dinner, my father asked me to formally step back from the business. It is time, he said. You have learned what you needed to learn. Now it is time to let the professionals handle things. He framed it as kindness. As releasing me from a burden I never wanted. You will be happier, he said. Trust me. Asked for time. One day, I said. Just to think it through. He agreed, relieved that I was not putting up a fight. That one day was all I needed. Another dinner happened 2 weeks later. Smaller group this time. Just family and a few close business partners. My father was in a good mood. The deal was moving forward. Everything was falling into place. And then, mid-conversation, he made another joke. Sharper this time. At least Lydia is consistent, he said, laughing. Consistently missing the point. People laughed. Not as loudly as before. But they laughed. Smiled. Because now I knew something they did not. The entity he was relying on to finalize his deal was no longer under his control. It was under mine. And he had no idea. I verified everything one more time. Quietly. Legally. Completely. The restaurant where we had that first dinner. Owned by a holding company that traced back to one of the entities I now controlled. The portfolio of properties he was consolidating. Several of them were tied to structures I had access to. The deal he was about to finalize. It required authorization from an entity where I had just been granted updated signing authority. Everything was connected. And the table quite literally was mine. I signed one document. A formal update to ownership records. Filed it with the proper authorities. Did nothing dramatic. Did not announce it. Did not threaten. Just quietly legally shifted control. Then I waited. Because I knew what would happen next. My father would try to finalize the deal. He would submit the paperwork. And it would be rejected. Because the authorization was no longer his to give. His calls came fast at first. Confused. Then frustrated. Then slower. Measured. Then desperate. He wanted to know what had happened. Why the deal was stalled. What had gone wrong. I did not answer most of them. When I did, I was polite. Vague. I am not sure, I said. Maybe it is just a paperwork issue. He tried to fix it himself. He called lawyers. He called partners. He called the entities involved. And slowly he began to realize. The problem was not a mistake. The problem was me. He apologized. He invited me to coffee and said he had been too hard on me. That he had not appreciated my contributions. That he wanted to give me more visibility. more respect. He offered me a title, real role, recognition. I almost accepted. Almost. But I remembered every insult, every dismissal, every time my name had been erased. And I realized that if I accepted now, nothing would change. He would just find another way to take control back. So I thanked him. And I said I needed time to think. Vincent, my father's old partner, called me. If you accept now, you lose everything, he said. He is buying time. Once he has control back, he will make sure you never have leverage again. I knew he was right. The clock was already running. My father had deadlines, investors waiting, partners pressuring him. If he could not finalize the deal soon, he would lose credibility, lose contracts, lose control. I just had to wait. I said nothing. I did not negotiate. I did not make demands. I just let time finish the work. Days passed, then weeks. The deal remained stalled. My father's partners started asking questions. Investors started pulling back. His authority, built over decades, began to crack. Not loudly, not publicly, but quietly, steadily. People stopped returning his calls as quickly. Meetings were postponed. Contracts were reviewed more carefully. And slowly, the respect he had built began to erode. Partners questioned him. Quietly at first, then more openly. Why is this taking so long, they asked. What is the delay? My father tried to explain. Blamed bureaucracy. Blamed legal complications. But the truth was simpler. He no longer controlled the entities he needed. And everyone was starting to realize it. Deals paused. Authority cracked. The structure he had built, the one that had made him untouchable, was fracturing. And it was fracturing because of the one person he had always dismissed. Me. There was one final dinner. Same restaurant. Same table. Same seats. But everything else was different. My father sat at the head of the table. But his confidence was gone. His shoulders were tight. His voice was quieter. The people around him were polite but distant. They knew something had shifted. They did not know exactly what. But they felt it. I sat in the same seat I had sat in months ago. The seat where I had been called a failure. The seat where I had stayed silent. This time I was not silent. But I did not need to be loud either. When my father made one last attempt at a joke, when he said something dismissive about my learning curve, I spoke. Only. Clearly. I own the entity controlling this property, I said. The table went silent. My father stared at me. What? The holding company that owns this restaurant, I continued. It traces back to an entity I control. The same entity tied to the deal you have been trying to finalize for the past 2 months. I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. Everything is documented. The structure, the connections, the ownership. No one spoke. My father opened the folder. He read the first page. Then the second. His face went pale. This is not possible, he whispered. It is, I said. And it is legal. Everything you built to protect yourself, you built on a foundation I was part of. You just never thought I would understand it. Silence. Complete. Final. The kind that ends things. No yelling. No scene. Just facts. The deal dissolved. Investors pulled out. Partners distanced themselves. My father's reputation, built on decades of careful control, cracked under the weight of a truth he had never anticipated. He had underestimated the person he had spent years dismissing. And that underestimation had cost him everything. Respect shifted. People who had once deferred to him now asked questions. People who had once trusted his authority now reviewed documents carefully. The empire he had built, the one held together by confidence and control, began to crumble. Not all at once, but steadily, irreversibly. If only my father had known that silence is not weakness. It is preparation. If only he had realized that the person he called a failure was the one holding the foundation of everything he controlled. But he did not. So I did not raise my voice. I did not fight. I did not make scenes. I just waited. I documented. Understood. And when the moment came, I spoke. Once. Clearly. And the table, the restaurant, the structure, the control he thought was his, all of it was mine. Because sometimes the people who underestimate you are standing on ground you quietly control. Let them laugh. Let them dismiss you. Let them call you a failure. And when the moment is right, when the timing is perfect, let them discover that you were never the one who needed saving. You were the one holding everything together. And you were the one who could take it all apart. My father called me a failure at dinner. He did not know I owned the table. And by the time he found out, it was too late to take back the words. Or the consequences.